All right, I'm now recording. Okay, we're now getting it live to Facebook here. Okay, stand by.
Where's my phone?
It's out there. Good. Oh, where is it? I'm gonna put it on silent, actually.
Good.
The minute you get on, you know it's gonna bark.
All right, guys, and we are now live, or we're going live. Jack, can you confirm when you see us kind of pop up on the phone on Facebook?
Sure.
Excellent.
There we are. We are live.
Okay. All right, hang on a sec. Okay, welcome. Happy Easter and welcome to another episode of Hollywood Kitchen. Today, I'm very pleased to have joining me the actress to whom this recipe was originally attributed, Miss Cora Sue Collins, child actress of the 1930s and 40s and legend, and my co-host, Jack Fields. So welcome, Cora Sue.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful that you, yes, of course I can hear you. I'm so thankful that you invited me. I'm delighted to be here. And hi, Jack, as well.
Good morning, Cora Sue. Happy Easter.
Happy Easter. We are so happy to have you here. Very honored. So this recipe that we're going to talk about today is a cookie recipe attributed to you in the Los Angeles Times in 1935. And one of the questions I always get asked when I do these is, did the star actually make this recipe? So Cora, did you actually make this?
We actually made the recipe at the LA Times. They had a kitchen there because it was before TV and you had to do everything live with just photo shoots. So yes, I made the cookies. But we also made a trial batch of them here, knowing that we were going to do the show. We followed the recipe religiously. They came out like bricks, paving stones. So we modified the recipe. The recipe that you have on television calls for 3 cups of flour. When it gets to that part of it, I'll explain that we reduce it to 2 cups and why.
Okay, very cool. So before we make the cookies, we want to open up with just a couple of questions. So Jack, do you want to kind of take it from here for a minute?
I'd be happy to. So Cora Sue, what is your earliest memory of your time in Hollywood?
My earliest memory of my time in Hollywood was the day, all right, my father gave his secretary a mink coat for Christmas. Mm-hmm. And my mother just arbitrarily decided that goes providing other than secretarial services. She dumped him. She picked up and packed up my sister, who was 8 years older than me, and we went to Hollywood. The third day we were there, my mother was enrolling my sister, who was older, in school. We were walking down Highland Avenue, and a car came screeching up to the sidewalk, and a beautiful lady, women got really all dressed up in those days. She hopped out of her car. She had on a beautiful suit and a huge hat on the side of her head. And she came over and she indicated me, and she asked my mother, she said, "Would you like to put your little girl in pictures?" And my mother said, "Yes." The lady said, "Good. There's a casting going on at Universal. Get in the car and I'll drive you." And my mother said, "No. I'm enrolling my older daughter in school. We'll follow you." It could only happen in Hollywood. I got the job. The first interview I went on, I ended up with a starring role. It was amazing. Slim Somerville and Zazu Pitts were the Lucy and Jessie of their era. And it was a film they were doing, and the picture was to be called Pudge, and it was Universal. And when I got the part, Carl Lamarr wanted to sign me to a 7-year contract, and for some reason or other, my mother didn't want to. So we changed the name from Pudge, which was the character's name I was playing, to Unexpected Father. So the first time I went on a studio live, here I ended up with Unexpected Father starring Slim Somerville, Zazu Pitts, and Cora Sue Collins. It could only happen in Hollywood. That's my first memory.
Wow. And what a memory you have. My gosh. You remember every detail of your time in Hollywood. And you answered my next question, which was, how did you come to be in the movies? So amazing. Let's go right on to a few specific films, because you ended up making over 50 movies over your time in Hollywood. And what are a few specific movies that come to your mind when you look back on your amazing
In
career?
my mother's filmography, she says that I made 110 films. Now, so many of those were, they had, shooting titles that were changed and so forth and so on. So I don't know how many films I made, but there were a lot more than 50, because I think Darren Barnes owns 55 or 60 of them now.
Well, I think, what are some of the most memorable, the ones that have stayed with you, the experiences that are the most memorable?
The first film I did, Unexpected Father. Of course, Queen Christina. Queen Christina was Greta Garbo, was MGM's most important star. She was Swedish, and they were filming Queen Christina. And in the actual history of Queen Christina, she was coronated when she was 5 years old because her father was killed in a war. So they needed a little girl, and she selected me. Now I'll tell you about the day she selected me. If you know what the old-fashioned sound stages were like, they were like airplane hangars. They were enormous. And I went into this huge airplane hangar-like room, and from floor to ceiling, there was a black velvet drapery. And all these little girls, we were all lined up in front of it. And one by one, they were excused. And I was just standing there alone. And the curtains opened a little bit. And a very pretty blonde lady with a kind of a funny accent came out. She chatted with me a few minutes and she left. And I'm still standing there. And my mother came out to get me. And she said, "You got the part. That was Greta Garbo." And I said, "Who?" I had never heard of her. Of course, I was 5 years old. What was I doing? Going to the movies? No. So that was, I guess, my most memorable moment.
And Greta Garbo is someone that, the rest of the world thought was this iconic, larger than life figure that people just idolized and thought was a goddess in her own right. And yet you just knew her as your colleague and your friend.
She was a wonderful woman. And she was the most misunderstood woman in time. People thought that she was arrogant or self-centered or something. No, she was just a very private lady. I feel it was her prerogative to, if she wanted to be alone, which was the line she never used, by the way. That was a script line. "I want to be alone" was something she never ever said. She simply didn't want to know people, that it was not her idea, that she wanted to know them. I'll give you an example. Well, I'm kind of jumping out of order, but I played in a film with her called Anna Karenina. Freddie Bartholomew was in it. And Miss Garbo liked children. So she invited Freddie to her dressing room. And he'd run a couple of times, and maybe the second or third time, he took a photograph of her and he said, "I'd like to ask you to autograph this to my mother." And she said, "Of course." And she autographed it. She never saw him again as long as she lived. Now, my mother wanted to meet Greta Garbo. And my mother would say to me, "Just tell Miss Garbo that your mother wants to meet her. Tell Miss Garbo you want her to meet your mother." And I said, "Mom, you just don't understand. You don't tell Miss Garbo anything. You just nod a lot." And what would happen is Miss Garbo would invite me to tea, which was tea for her, and for me it was milk or hot chocolate. And my mother would take me to her dressing room. Our dressing rooms were in the same building. That's the only similarity. Mine was a closet, and I had to go down the hall to the bathroom. Miss Garbo's was palatial. It had a sitting room and bedrooms and bathrooms and this and that and the other. But my mother would take me to her dressing room. And In those days, Miss Garbo had this wonderful African-American lady who worked for her. She was terrific. Anyway, she would go to the door. She would put her right hand on the door and her left hand on the door jab. As she would open the door, she would reach forward with her left hand, take me by the hand, bring me toward her as she was closing the door. And she would say, "Thank you, Miss Collins. When Cora Sue was finished, I'll take her to her dressing room." Boom. And that was it.
You were very perceptive, Cora, at a very young age to be able to sense that she was that private and not ask her for anything and not, violate her privacy in any way. That was really smart.
Thank you. But I just loved that lady. She was so kind and so sweet. She also a misconception. Everyone said she was stingy. She was not. Every time she went to Sweden, she brought me presents. So I have a house full of gifts from her. I just love that lady. In fact, the last times I saw her were in Paris. Lot dissolved, many years went by. And on a whim, I bought an apartment in Paris. And I used to spend every summer for 27 years, tough job, somebody had to do it. I would spend the summer in Paris and the winter in Beverly Hills. And Miss Garbo called me one day and she said, I'm going to visit you. I said, "Oh, good." So she came to visit me and she bought an apartment on Avenue Montaigne. And for another 12, 13 years, we would walk every day during the summer when she was there, when I was there, when we were there, I should say. She would call me in the morning. She said, "Cora Sue, you want to walk?" And I would say, "Yes." She'd say, "I pick you up." So she'd pick me up and we'd go for a walk. We'd walk for an hour and a half, 2 hours, 2.5 hours. Paris is the most beautiful city, I think, in the world in which to walk. Then we would go back to my apartment for tea. She would have tea, I would have hot chocolate. Something interesting. I never, ever saw Miss Garbo take a drink. I'm sure she drank with other people, probably. I really don't know. But she never drank with me. We just had hot chocolate and she had tea. Anyway, we would come back to my apartment and she would be mumbling to herself, "I just don't understand." And I'd say, "You don't understand?" And she'd say, "They still remember me." Oh, excuse me, it's allergy season. She'd say, "They still remember me." She said, "After all those years, they say, 'You Greta Garbo.'" May I describe what she would wear? She would wear men's shoes, men's trousers, this polo coat, and a big slouch hat. Now, if you were going to do an imitation of Greta Garbo, isn't that what you'd wear? I never had the nerve to tell her that she dressed as she had dressed in those days. She was the sweetest, dearest lady. I just loved her. You want to hear another story about Greta Garbo?
Absolutely.
Sure.
She had a home in Beverly Hills. She had a home in many places, but this was her home in Beverly Hills. And in her back garden, she had a big rectangular swimming pool. And it was all bricked in, red brick. And there was a big tree and a big round table. And I would go there and we would swim and whatnot. And then we would have lunch. And one day she said to me, "Cora Sue, you are very fortunate." Well, I had learned that if you repeat the last few words of a phrase, usually people will continue with their train of thought. And I said, "I am very fortunate." She said, "Yes, look at your breasts. They are beautiful. And you have never had to swim 100 lengths in an ice cold lake or swimming pool every day of your life." This poor sweet lady, from the time she lived in Germany, then she swam in an icy lake, and she was like a ironing board. She had been told by someone who didn't know what the hell we were talking about, that if she would swim 100 laps in ice cold water every morning, she'd develop breasts. Isn't that sad?
And amazing to think, anybody could possibly tell Greta Garbo that she needed to work on her appearance. It's, wow, interesting.
I don't know. She believed them.
Hmm.
Want to hear a story about Hedy Lamarr?
I'd love to. We'd love to.
Hedy Lamarr was, we all know, the most beautiful woman in the world. I was being interviewed at the Hollywood Brown Derby, and my mother was with me, of course. And the lady who was interviewing me wanted to go to the ladies' room. So she and my mother said, would you like to go to the ladies' room with us? And I said no, because Hedy Lamarr was sitting opposite us. And I waited and I watched until I saw my mother and this lady go into the ladies' room and close the door. And then I stood up and walked. The booths faced each other, but there was a walkway in between. And so I stood up and I said, hello, Miss Lamarr, how are you? And she said, very well, Cora Sue, how are you? And I said, very well, thank you. Your mother is still in Europe, isn't she? And Hedy said, yes. And she said, how did you know? And I said, I knew that if she was here, she would have told you it's very rude at the table for you to take that big black comb out of your purse and comb your hair and put it back on the table. Look, it even has hairs in it. Well, you would think that she would never have spoken to me again the rest of my life. She was such a lovely lady. She knew I was just trying to help her. We remained friends until she died.
Wow.
Isn't that a sweet lady story?
Love that story. And again, we've just started with only two, Hedy Lamarr and Greta Garbo, two of the most beautiful and iconic actresses ever. But Cora Sue, you have a story about every Hollywood legend that there is, and we could do this over and over and over again.
And we will.
We will.
We'll do it, because now we should get to cooking.
Let's get to cooking, Cora Sue. And then after we've got the cookies in the oven, we will get back into this fascinating stuff. And we will take viewer questions. And by the way, we're already planning sequels here. So
I'm really looking forward to the Q&A. That's always fun. All right. I have in this bowl, according to the recipe, I have a pound of butter, softened, a cup of white granulated sugar, and a cup of brown sugar, well mixed. I am now going to add 2 well-beaten eggs to the mixture.
I'm cooking along with you, Cora Sue.
Pardon?
I'm cooking along with you, Cora Sue.
Okay. And we mix that
Yeah.
well. Now we come to the flour. We reduce the flour to 2 cups. Now it also says in the recipe that it must be sifted 3 times with a tablespoonful of soda and half a teaspoon of salt. Now I am going to put into the sifter 2 cups of flour.
Cora Sue, I have a question. You told me that we don't need 3 cups of flour, which is what the recipe calls for. What does the extra flour do to kind of mess up the recipe? Because you were talking about that earlier.
It made them taste like paving stones. They were hard. They were like a rock. By reducing the amount of flour and leaving the butter and eggs, you were able to have a mixture that was less cement-like. So that's the reason.
Okay. So you would recommend what, 2 cups?
2 cups. We're making it today with 2 cups. Now, this is long and painstaking. So what I did was I made a batch last night, which are already cooked. But I want to explain about how you take them from that bowl. Wait a second. I have a big piece of wax paper, and you flour the wax paper. You flour your hands, and then you remove the mixture of the cake batter, and you make a little roll. Then you roll it up. Now I'll show you how it looks after you've made it into a log. It looks like this. You twist the ends so it retains its shape. Then to keep it, you place it in a plastic bag in the refrigerator, because if you don't, it's soft and it loses shape. Now, to actually make the cookies, you unroll it, remove it from the wax paper, take a knife, pre-mark so that you have all the cookies the same size and you don't have any surprises. Then you slice the cookie batter, comme ça. And we now have these wonderful new types of cookie sheets. This is, one is nonstick, so you don't have to flour and butter it. Two, it has a corrugated base, which is wonderful because when you place the cookies on it, oops, one-handed is not so good, which you place 1 inch apart, that gives them room to spread as they cook. The corrugated base enables the air to flow beneath the cookie so it doesn't brown too much on the bottom. Anyway, that's, now I would now put these in the oven, but we cooked them last night. So now I'm going to run into the other room, get out of this hot kitchen, so we can answer questions and continue chatting. See you in a second.
Okay, and meanwhile, while Cora Sue is changing, I have creamed all of the ingredients together in a bowl like so. I'm also going to do what Cora Sue says, which is only add the 2 cups of flour instead of 3. Also, the original LA Times recipe that Cora Sue had, which I will post, also called for adding a cup of walnuts, but Cora Sue recommended adding chocolate chips instead. She says chocolate chips make everything better, and I certainly cannot disagree with that. So I'm stirring up all the ingredients right now. And I think Cora Sue really gave us a great demonstration of how to make these.
It was wonderful. Cora Sue, do you remember where you got that recipe from? Oh, I
I
think.
remember.
Okay. I think she's changing clothes here for us.
Lady, she was so sweet.
Okay, in the meanwhile, I'm going to keep mixing up the mixture here, but I do want to show you what the final product looks like, of course. You can use walnuts, you can use chocolate chips, but this is the final product here. And basically we have chocolate chip cookies. All right, now let's get back into the conversation, Cora Sue. I am a big Peter Lorre fan, so I would love to hear your story about working with Peter Lorre on the film Mad Love.
Oh, that was so funny. I love Peter. Peter Lorre was a wonderful person. But in the film, they had a scene where he was holding a scalpel above me. It slipped and it fell, cut right through the robe that I was draped with. I still have a scar. Anyway, he didn't need it. This was the sweetest. He was the antithesis of the parts he played. He was a charming, loving, caring man. Hi, Jack. Welcome back.
And you have a really lovely story too about Lana Turner. So can you share the Lana Turner story with us?
I could spend the rest of the day talking about Lana. I loved her. Lana was one of my mother's best friends. And when I must have been 6 or 7 years old, no older, because I was still calling her Miss Turner. My mother went on vacation and Lana babysat me for 2 weeks. And while we were at her house, I said, "Oh, Miss Turner, I just love your eyebrows." That was when she wore them. They were tweezed and drawn on the middle of her forehead practically. And I said, "When I grow up, I want eyebrows like yours." She said, "Are you working for the next couple of weeks?" And I said, "Not to my knowledge." She said, "Good, we'll do it now." So she tweezed my eyebrows. Guess what? They never grew back. To this day, I only have eyebrows out to here. Mr. Mayor was livid. My mother didn't speak to her for 2 weeks. It wasn't her fault, it was mine. I asked her to do it, for goodness sakes.
So basically, let me get this straight. You have been cut by Peter Lorre accidentally, and you have been plucked by Lana
Yes,
Turner.
that's
I don't
right.
think there's anybody else in the world that can lay claim to such awesome things.
I don't know. I was blessed. I had the most fun childhood, if you could call it a childhood. It wasn't really, because I worked 6 days a week from Monday through Saturday at MGM. And many Sundays, I had to go to Mr. Mayor's house to entertain his granddaughters, try to teach them to horseback ride. They had no talent for it. Or entertain visiting dignitaries, whatever. Because if you were under contract to Mr. Mayor, you were like a piece of chaff. An invitation was not an invitation, it was command performance. You appeared. So anyway, I had an unusual childhood, but I met two friends who introduced me to my childhood. I hated it. I wouldn't discuss it. I would just cut them off and say, that's like yesterday's newspaper. We wrap the trash in it. But Darren Barnes and Daryl Rooney, I met them and they taught me that my childhood was wonderful. And I enjoy it now because all of these memories used to come up and I try to suppress them. Why are they popping up? And now I love talking. In fact, I'm boring as hell. Now I love talking about my childhood.
And if I'm correct, I believe you hadn't even seen many of your movies until you met Darren and Daryl. Is that right?
I think I had seen 3 of them.
Mhm.
Not for any, I had never asked to see them. I now have seen several of my movies, and eventually they're going to show me all of them. All of them they have a bundle of them. And I'm just loving it. In fact, Darren was so funny. The first night I met him, he said, I'm going to change your life. And I'm thinking to myself, sure, he has.
He wasn't kidding.
And Daryl have changed my life for the better. I thank them both very, very much.
I want to get back to Greta Garbo, Cora Sue, if that's okay. Can you tell me about the premiere of Queen Christina? Because from what I understand, it had a pretty extravagant Hollywood premiere.
It was incredible. Miss Garbo would not make personal appearances. She was the most important actress in the world at that time. No one could talk back to Mr. Mayor, but she did. So MGM built a miniature carriage, exact scale, for the carriage in which Queen Christina was coronated in Sweden, but it was miniature, and it was pulled by 12 Shetland ponies, and they had little people who were footmen and coachmen. And Freddie Bartholomew accompanied me. He was my escort. And we went to the premiere. Now, the day before, we did a rehearsal. And the day before, they had me standing on a grip. A grip is a man who worked on the stage. He was in uniform, and he was on his hands and knees so I could stand on him because they didn't have a microphone that would adjust. And the microphone was head taller, way above me. So I stood on his back, and there were policemen, or actually MGM cops, holding the crowds back. And a woman forced her way through a lovely lady. She came up and they tried to pull her away, and she put something in my hand. And what she placed in my hand was a gold coin minted during the reign of Queen Christina with her image on it. We later found out who she was. She was a very sweet lady, and it was a lovely gift which I still cherish. So that was, and Mr. Mayor attended the real premiere.
Mhm.
And I was very, I thought, blessed to be escorted by Mr. Mayor. He was very important.
A lot has been said and thought about and talked about the legendary Louis B. Mayer. He was a businessman. He was kind of a scoundrel. But what are your general thoughts on that legendary filmmaker?
He was not a nice man. I don't know anyone in that epoch or later who has ever had anything nice to say about him, except some woman who was I think she's a relative or something, wrote a book about him and knows nothing about it. No one ever had a kind word to say about that man because he was not a nice person. In fact, I had a very difficult Me Too incident with him. Harry Ruskin was my mentor. I met him when I was 5 or 6 years old. And as I told you, my mother and father were divorced, and I didn't have a father image. And Harry was my father image. He was my mentor. My philosophy is his philosophy. I just love this man. And he was a very amusing person, but he was a very talented author. He was the most important writer at MGM. And at lunch, MGM, the commissary had terrible food. So Harry used to order food in from a good restaurant. And those of us he considered amusing, I was very flattered to be among that group, he would invite them for lunch. And 25, 30 people would be there for lunch every day. We never knew who was coming, just whoever was on the lot. The biggest stars, the biggest writers, directors, producers, choreographers, etc., would come to would go to his office for lunch. And one day he called me and he said, "Are you coming to lunch next Tuesday?" And I said, "I really don't know, Harry." He called me the next day, "Are you coming to lunch Tuesday?" And I said, "I don't know, Harry." The next day he called and he said, "Would you come to lunch on Tuesday?" I said, "Yes." So I went to lunch on Tuesday and I walked in. The office was empty. I said, "Where is everybody?" Harry said, "I wrote a film for you of a synopsis and I wanted you to read it." It was so perfect for me, you can't imagine. I would have given my right arm to play it, not my virginity. And that was what he wanted. There it was, the proposition, sleep with him. And to me, it was incest. It was incestual because he was like my father. But battered wife syndrome, same thing. I started wondering, what have I said? Have I dressed inappropriately? What have I done to cause this? I was sure I had caused it, which was not the case, but it took me a hell of a long time to figure that out. Anyway, I finally realized I was going to start to cry, so I excused myself. I said, anyway, when he found out I wasn't going to sleep with him, he said, "There are a dozen girls in this town who would love to play that part and sleep with me. They wouldn't play it as well." I said, "Good, let them, that's wonderful." And I excused myself and left because I realized I was going to cry. So I went down the hall, and in those days, Mr. Mayor's office was upstairs and the executive dining room and the kitchen. All the other executives were on the first floor. Irving Thalberg's office was upstairs as well. Excuse me. Anyway, the first door I came to that was unlocked was a cleaning closet. So I went in and barricaded the door, no lights, mind you. And I had a good cry, and then I mop and sop. I cleaned myself up, got myself together, and went up to Mr. Mayor's office. And when I went in, his private secretary, Ida Koverman, said, "Cora Sue, you don't have an appointment with Mr. Mayor today." I said, "No, but I see lots of people here. I can wait." And I sat down. So pretty soon, the door opened, and this was unusual. Mr. Mayor came out to pick me up. He never did that. If the president was going to be there, he would wait in his office until the president came in, and he would ask him to sit. He wanted to make an impression always. He did, not always the best. Anyway, he came and got me, and on the way in, he said, "Have you seen Harry?" And yeah. And he said, "Don't you love the script?" He kept asking me questions. "Your favorite director, your favorite cinematographer, aren't you thrilled?" And I couldn't get a word in edgewise, so I thought, well, I'll just wait until he finishes. So we were in his office. We were seated at his desk. And he had a Napoleonic complex. He was a little man. And he had this enormous desk, and I was opposite him in this huge black leather chair in a corner. And I said, "Mr. Mayor, do you know what Harry wants me to do? He wants me to." Mr. Mayor got up, came around, pulled me toward him, and said, "Darling, you'll get used to it." I couldn't believe it. And I thought to myself, this is the ultimate, this is the end. So I explained to him that I would not sleep with him. I wouldn't sleep with Harry. I wouldn't sleep with any. There was no way. So 45 minutes later, I had convinced him I was never going to work. He lunged across the desk, waggled his little fat stubby finger under my nose and said, "Cora Sue, you will never work again on a soundstage as long as you live." And I said, "Mr. Mayor, that's my heartfelt desire. And to this day, the best single decision in my life. No regrets."
Wow, wow. Well, and it's our loss that you didn't, you retired at 18 years old in 1945
Yes.
with your last appearance at Weekend at the Waldorf.
Oh,
Cora
that's
Sue,
interesting. That's
oh,
interesting. Weekend at the Waldorf was filmed a couple of years later than this incident with Mr. Mayer. And my phone rang. I recognized his voice. It was Mr. Mayer. And he said, hello. And I said, hello, Mr. Mayer. How are you? And he said, very well, thank you. How are you? He said, I'm making a picture with all your buddies. I said, I know that. Everyone's told me about Weekend at the Waldorf. He said, how would you like to play the bride who spends the weekend at the Waldorf? And I said, I'd love to. So that's why I did it. And then I realized I still didn't want to work. I didn't want, the film industry is a rotten industry. I think it is today. Actually, very little has changed in that aspect. There's still a casting couch.
yeah.
And I'm glad I left when I did. I have wonderful memories now, thanks to my two friends. And best decision I ever made.
Yeah, and it is, but it is to our loss that you didn't make any more movies because you were so wonderful and so talented. And
Oh, Jack,
do
that's
you,
so sweet
uh,
of you.
even though
Thank
you
you
made the
so
right
much.
decision, absolutely, and you've built a wonderful life because you went on to become a Hollywood wife, and you did so many wonderful things, and you have a beautiful family. And but if I may, I would like to ask, were there any roles? Did you continue to watch movies or follow
I
Hollywood
continue to
as
watch
you continued
movies.
on? And was there
I
anything?
continued- Yes, I continued to watch movies and I continued to go to Broadway shows. And I would see parts and I would think, I could do that role, but I never wanted to. Do you remember a man named Jimmy Niederlander?
Mm-hmm.
He owned more theaters than anyone in the world at one time and produced a lot of the really top Broadway shows. He would call me a minimum once a year and say, I have a role, it's just perfect for you. And I would say no.
Wow.
I was very happy being a nobody. I enjoyed the luxury of anonymity, being a nobody. You've no idea what it's like when you've always had to have the face on, be camera ready and so forth. From the time I was 3, it was terrific. I loved being a nobody, just a housewife from Phoenix.
Well, you didn't have a childhood really, and like a lot of things that a lot of us get to do and we take for granted, probably you didn't get to have because you had a full-on career.
You don't realize how restricted you are. But I want to tell you a story. L.B. Mayer gave me a birthday party. In fact, that's how I met Darren and Daryl. I went to Julian's auction house because a friend of mine has an enormous collection of Judy Garland memorabilia. And Judy was one of my dearest, closest friends. And he had asked me if I would go and give a talk. And I said, if I don't have to discuss my childhood, I will. Just anecdotes about Judy and me, yes. So I went and I talked. And the auction started. And it went like gangbusters. And I'm bored. I want to go home. And no one's ready. And I needed someone to call me a car or whatever. So there was a wall opposite, and there were 3 chairs on it. So I sat in the middle chair. And then I noticed 2 very, very attractive young men coming toward me. And I looked at them, they were very handsome, and I'm thinking, straight, metrosexual, gay, they're gorgeous. Anyway, they proceeded, and the first one came to me was Daryl Rooney, and he said, I'm Daryl Rooney. No. He walked up and he said, you're Cora Sue Collins. And I said, yes. And he said, in 1935, L.B. Mayer gave you a birthday party because your birthday and May Robeson's birthday were on April the 19th. May Robeson was a very famous star at MGM, and she was going to be 70, and you were going to be 8. Mr. Mayer thought it would be better if he gave you a joint birthday party, and you said you were 7. Here I was, a 7-year-old, having to say I was going to be 7. I wanted to be 8 so badly. Anyway, Mr. Mayer gave me this birthday party, which, as I said, was a command performance. Everybody came. I mean, anyone who was invited would come. And these 2 young men were there. And Daryl told me that he collected Jean Harlow memorabilia. And he mentioned, he said, you were given a gift by May Robeson. You were given an autograph book. It's this autograph book, which you can barely lift. It's gorgeous. It's hand carved. It's wood. Has a little plaque here that says it's from May Robeson. Has my name. It's over in the date 1935. Well, I'm looking at this young man and I'm thinking, is he a stalker? My daughter doesn't know that. Who is this man? Well, it came, the only reason he really wanted to talk with me was he wanted to see this book. He wanted to see her signature because Jean Harlow had attended and she had signed the book, and people had said that she hadn't signed it. And I had argued with them because it's pretty hard for me to say she didn't sign it. I was standing there and I watched her sign it. Anyway, he came to the house. He authenticated it. We became friends. And that was when I met Darren as well. And that was when Darren said to me, I'm going to change your life. And he did.
Fantastic
Oh
night.
my goodness,
I'll never
guess what?
forget it.
I have the cookies. Here are the
Ah.
cookies.
Oh, hooray!
Excuse me if I'm rude.
Well, Jack, why don't we start taking questions from our audience now? Do you want to check in and see who's hitting us up on Facebook?
Oh, I would love to.
Absolutely.
Who's
If
first?
you want to start submitting your questions on Facebook Live, I will share them to the chat right now. That was a fantastic evening, Cora Sue. It was my honor to meet you that night as well, and that group photo we all took is one of my most cherished moments. So
Mine too, and I'm
so
so
happy
glad.
to call you a friend,
I'm
and
always
Darren,
glad
a
to see
friend
you,
too.
Jack.
Yeah.
This is my dog Angel.
Oh,
He's cute. Is it a he or
She's
she?
adorable.
lovely.
She's 10 years old. She's a rescue, and she's the worst spoiled brat I've ever. I do love her, but she can be very naughty.
Very
So
cute.
what's my first question?
Yeah, Jack, how are we doing with the questions?
Jack Priest is asking about the time you saw Norma Shear in L.B. Mayer's office. And I know that
goodness.
Norma Shear is someone that Darren loves as well, and I love as well. And my personal favorite movie of yours is Smiling Through. So.
Oh, I love that film, and I loved filming it.
Yes.
But Miss Shear was a wonderful lady. And the day that I was waiting in Mr. Mayer's office to go into him, that I had that terrible incident. No, it was another day. It was another day. I was in his office. I was very young. I was 5 or 6. The door opened, and we saw the back of a beautiful lady. And she had her right hand on the door and her left hand on the door jamb. And she said, "Don't tell me that. I fucked every Jew bastard on the way up." And she slammed the door and turned around and saw me. And she said, "Cora Sue, I didn't know you were here." So I asked my mother. I knew all the other words. I said, "What does fucked mean?" My mother was just, I said, "Don't worry, I'll ask Miss Coverman. She's his private secretary. She'll know." I asked Miss Coverman. She was as upset as my mother. So I'm mumbling to myself as I walked away from her desk, "That's all right, I'll ask Mr. Mayer." My mother, Miss Coverman, jumped up and said, "You can't ask him." Have you ever tried to shut up a 5 or 6-year-old? Can't. Comes in here, comes out there. Anyway, I went into his office, and as we're walking, I asked him, and he was as discombobulated as the others had been. And I said, "Never mind, Mr. Mayer, I'll look it up in the dictionary." Of course, in those days, that long ago, they didn't have it in the dictionary. That's okay, I found out. So that was what happened in Mr. Mayer's office.
Love it. Danny Miller is asking about your story with Zazu Pitts.
Oh, God, I've got a zillion of them.
You were reprimanded by Zazu Pitts, more specifically, for forgetting a line.
Oh, forgetting my line. Oh, that
That's
was a really funny one. My mother, that was the first film I made, was with you may not have this cookie. I'm going to put it down. She's so bossy. My mother read the script to me as I went to sleep that night. I had this peculiar kind of memory. And she read it from cover to cover. So the next day on the set, the first scene that I was in was with Miss Pitts. And I said a line, and then She was to say a line and so forth and so on. I said the line, my line, and then she flubbed her line. And they said, cut. And I said, oh no, Miss Pitts. I say so and so. You say such and such. Camera dollies to a 2-shot. And I go on. And she just said, just left the room. And I thought, well, I don't know. I'll just wait. So pretty soon she came back. She was a delight. I don't know where she got it so fast. She had a huge pillow and a belt. She must have found somebody with, maybe one of the guys who worked there. And she'd strapped this pillow on her derriere. And she indicated to the director to sit in the chair. She stretched out and she said, now spank me. If a 3-year-old can remember her lines and the set directions, I swear to you, I'll never set foot on another soundstage without learning my lines. I didn't realize that she never bothered learning the lines. She learned them on the set. Years later, we remained friends all of her life. She was a lovely woman. Her daughter was a good friend of mine too. And 30 years later, she would say, she's the reason I can work on Broadway. I learned my lines because of her. She was a lot.
Ruth Munsack is asking if you ever met Mr. Cary Grant, her favorite.
Yes, I have. And I thought he was so handsome, and he was so charming. And we did, why I'll never know, a wonderful, silly photo shoot with bicycles where I sat in his arms on the, he was just one of the most handsome men I've ever known and one of the nicest.
I cannot even imagine what that would have been like.
And speaking of Dreamy Fellows.
Pretty impressive for a little 7-year-old, right?
Speaking of Dreamy Fellows, I know you and I, Cora Sue, share a mutual crush on the gorgeous Mr. Robert Taylor.
Oh!
Who you made another one of my favorite films of yours is Magnificent Obsession.
He was my first crush. I just loved him. And I have a picture somewhere, I don't know where we're standing in a hallway and I'm in his arms. And I thought I died and gone to heaven. Anyway, in Magnificent Obsession, in his first film was...
Magnificent Obsession wasn't his first movie, but it was his first starring role. And it made him a big star. And
Yes.
you're wonderful in that with Irene Dunn.
But I was going to tell you about Spectacle Maker, which was the first color short made in the United States. And John Farrow, who was a very, very famous director and cinematographer or whatever from England, he was more famous now as Mia Farrow's father, but then he was a very famous director, directed that film. And I was the star of it because I was the little princess. And it was about a spectacle maker who could make a lens that would tell the truth. And it was charming. And he played the boyfriend of the queen of his king. You would never even recognize him, but he was a delightful man. And I knew him very well. And his first wife, Josephine Dillon, was my vocal coach. Not my vocal coach, excuse me. But when I had to do accents, she would train me for accents. She was a lovely, now I've got the hiccups. That's what I get for eating too fast.
I have a question for Sue. Let's talk about Lucille Ball.
Oh my God, Lucy was one of my very dearest friends. I met her first on the lot at MGM, where I met Mr. Mayer had what was called the stable. The majority of the important actors, directors, producers, directors, and so forth were under contract to him. We call it the stable. Anyway, I met her and I was 4 or 5 years old. It was during the war, and her mother would make her cookies. And Lucy didn't want to get fat, so she'd give me the cookies. And I, of course, ate them with gusto and loved them. One day, Mrs. Ball, Lucy's mother, called my mother, and she said, Mrs. Collins. And my mother said, yes, Mrs. Ball, how are you? Mrs. Ball said, have you had Cora Sue checked by a doctor recently? My mother said, yes. Why? Mrs. Ball said, does she have tapeworms? And my mother was aghast. That was because I ate all the cookies. Well, of course, I wouldn't tell Miss Ball it was because Lucy didn't want to get fat. But that was quite a bone of contention. But then Lucy and I remained friends for the rest of her life. In fact, lap dissolved years later after she and Jesse were divorced. I was sick. I don't know what I had. Bronchitis, the flu, walking pneumonia, I don't know what. And Lucy always, she had a key to every house I went in. She had a key and she came in and she brought me her recipe to get me well, her remedy. She had gone to a butcher and had beef pressed the way you would press a duck. So you got the blood. Then she cooked it until it just congealed and she brought it to, and she spoon fed me. I got well. I'm not sure if it was this horrible stuff she put down my gullet or that I was just terrified she was going to bring more of it, but whatever. Lucy was the dearest, sweetest. I just loved her. She was a wonderful lady. I cherish her to this day.
Oh. Lawrence Kaplowitz, another star from Smiling Through, is asking about Frederick March, another star from Smiling Through.
Frederick March was a lovely man. When I first met him for the interview, in the middle of the interview, or right at the first of the interview, the little girl, my character, was supposed to lift up her skirt and say, I have on my best panties. And they said, lift your skirt. And I said, no. And they said, you just have to lift your skirt. And I said, no. They had to send to the wardrobe department and get about 6 pairs of panties until I decided I had enough panties on. And then I would lift my skirt. I must have been the worst pain in the ass. Anyway, I loved Frederick March. He was delightful.
Very charming guy.
Yes.
Well, what else have we got here? Jack Priest is asking about Anne Rutherford.
Oh, Jack Priest, I've got to tell you, Anne Rutherford was one of my dearest, dearest friends. I loved Ansie, as we called her. I became friends with her when I was working at MGM, but then we remained friends the rest of her life. In fact, I don't know of anyone, except maybe Lucille Ball, that I miss more than Anne. I just loved Anne Rutherford. She was a delight.
Pauline Halloran is asking if you ever met Mr. Tyrone Power.
Ooh.
Yes. Speak about a gorgeous man. He was so handsome. His son is very good looking as well. But Tyrone Power was charming, delightful, gracious. I was lucky because I was a child, but I was lucky to meet these people when I was so young, because unless a child is a real brat, it's hard to be mean to a child. So I had wonderful relationships with people who had terrible reputations, but they were nice to me. I just lived a charmed life.
I have a question, Cora Sue. What about William Powell and Myrna Loy? Because you were in the film Evelyn Prentice with them.
Oh my God. William Powell was one of the dearest friends of my life. Myrna Loy, too, she was lovely, and her husband. But William Powell was he was so sweet and so dear. When I was grown and had my children, phone would ring and it would be William Powell. And he would say, what are you doing? Nothing. Would you like to come over? Yes. And he'd come over and he'd spend time with us. He was not only kind to me when I was a child, he was kind to my children. And Dick Powell as well. One day the phone rang and it was Dick. And he said, what are you doing? I said, I'm just dressing the children. We're going to a party, birthday party. He said, may I go? I said, sure. So I still have pictures that were taken of that birthday party where my children were in costume. And here's Dick and me, we're with him. He was just these wonderful actors, producers, directors, and so forth that I met were all such down-to-earth, everyday people. They were just lovely. I was interviewed by a female journalist about 3 years ago, and she said, weren't you intimidated by all of these important people? I said, no, I was intimidated by baseball players. I said, they were just my next door neighbors. They were just my buddies. but it's true. They were those humble, down-to-earth, kind people.
Was there anybody who, just wasn't as nice and wonderful and charming as all these wonderful people we've talked about so far? Was there anybody who maybe disappointed you? Besides Louis B. Mayer, of course.
We've discussed that.
Yes.
He was in a category of his own. I guess he was the one who really disappointed me. I can't think of I've had such a good, I still have relationships from my childhood. I'm being interviewed this Wednesday by Cappy Badroot's grandson. And we became friends when I was 4 and she was 5. And we remained best friends until she passed away. I've just been blessed with wonderful friendships. Most of my friendships are, if it's a short relationship, it's 25 or 30 years.
Mhm.
So, Cora, I would like to talk also about life after Hollywood. So when you gave up your career, you were happy to sort of leave show business behind. And how did you find fulfillment doing other things? You had a family. Talk about kind of what you did to keep busy and to find enjoyment in your life after films.
Carrie, I reinvented myself a half a dozen times. I went to Acapulco with a girlfriend of mine, and my husband had just passed away, and I was very concerned that my children, because I had 3, boy, girl, girl, would not have someone to admire as far as athletics were concerned, because I could dance. That was about all I could do other than act. And I saw, as we drove around Acapulco, I saw this water ski show. And I looked at those girls and I thought, balance, I could do that. So we drove around, and a couple of days later, I went over to the Club de Skis and met the owners, who were both from Arizona. Very nice people. And I said, I would like to learn to water ski. Oh, well, no, I said, I don't want a teacher. I'm a mimic. I would like the one who represents, I would like one with the best posture, with the best form. So they issued me this wonderful guide, and I learned to ski with him. And I took my first tournament 3 months after I put on my first ski. But I was only doing what I knew how to do. Can't take any credit for it at all. Anyone who has been a professional ballet on point dancer or a professional ice skater, figure skater, it's a lateral transfer. You can't take any credit for it. You can only be grateful. What I did was, we would stand on a dock, and I had one ski on. We'd jump into the water. I'd put that one ski in the water, the right foot. I would put the left foot up on his knee, jump up on his shoulders, and stand up on his shoulders and do all sorts of ballet poses. That was like a hood ornament. So I really wasn't doing anything that I hadn't all done all my life. So that was just one of my reinventions.
What are some of your other reinventions?
Well, I decided that we needed a guard dog. My husband was very difficult to give a gift, because if he didn't have it, it's because he didn't want it. And one day I decided that we should buy this collection of Fabergé. I think I really wanted it, but anyway, I'm going to buy this collection of Fabergé, which was world famous, but it was privately owned. And I bought it, and I thought, I've made us a mark, because now they're going to know where that collection is going. So I thought, we need a guard dog. So I started looking for guard dogs, and I later found out they were called companion guards, and I came up with the name Rottweiler. So I bought a Rottweiler, and this Rottweiler was divine. And I told my husband about it. My husband said, well, the dog, it's wonderful that you're going to have a dog like that, but the dog is going to stay outside, won't come in the house. The dog, of course, came in the house, came in our bedroom. Make a long story dull, I bred, trained, showed Rottweilers all over the world for 27 years. I love Rottweilers. They are so misunderstood. there are bad Rottweiler owners, just as there are bad pit bull owners. But Rottweilers, if they're properly bred, unless, for instance, an unscrupulous breeder will take an overly aggressive male, breed it to an overly aggressive female, and not socialize those puppies, and they bring up people eaters. But they're wonderful dogs. So that was just one of my reinventions.
Darren Barnes is asking about how you managed to hold up production on Treasure Island.
Oh, that was so funny.
Great.
Right, Jackie Cooper, who's a dear friend of mine, and I were working on, there was no little girl in Treasure Island, but if you worked for L.B. Mayer, you worked 12 months a year. So I was written into the story, and we had a break, and we were playing, and both of us happened to have teeth missing. I had a front tooth missing, for which a plate had been made, and he had another tooth missing. And being kids are kids, we took out our plates. And then when they got ready to film, we couldn't remember where we put them. We'd been playing 15 to 20 minutes. It took 4 hours for them to find our plates. They couldn't photograph pieces. They finally found them. We had taken one of those folding paper cups that you blew on and expanded, filled with water, put both of our plates in it together, kids, and leaned it up against the mirror in his portable dressing room.
Great story.
Had no choice.
What was it like when you saw your films on the big screen for the first time? How many of them did you see at the time? And then how many of them have you seen today?
I saw the first one when I was an adult. And I believe it was, I can't remember which one it was. It was at the Egyptian Theater. And it was an event I had to attend, or I wouldn't have seen it then. I was an adult. As I said, I worked 6 days a week.
Yeah.
That was from morning until they broke at night. And the next day I had to return knowing my lines. So if you think on the one day off, Sunday, we'd go to mass and then we'd do something in the afternoon. If you think I was going to spend my one day off going to the movies, you're crazy. So I didn't see any of my films. I was full grown. And my children knew nothing. Oh,
Which one is your favorite?
Pardon?
What's your favorite of your movies?
Probably Queen Christina. No, Unexpected Father, my very first film. I loved that. And I got to see it for the first time, the Egyptian Theater. That was the only film I ever really wanted to see, and I had never seen it. And it was wonderful because I mentioned to a friend of mine, to a friend of his, so it was finally organized. And I loved watching it because I'd never seen myself. And I was really 3 years old when that started. And there was a lockdown for some reason, I think. I know what it was. Carl Laemmle almost lost the studio. So it took a year to make. But when I started, I was 3. And then you can see, as the film progressed, I became more camera wise, which was pointed out to me by Darren. I didn't recognize it. I didn't even realize. I was just watching myself. It was fun. So that has to be my favorite film. Second one would be Queen Christina.
And
What does your family think of your films?
Pardon?
What does your family think of your films? Have they seen a lot of them too?
No, they never saw them. They're seeing them now as well. They all went to see the one that went to see Unexpected Father at the Egyptian Theater. Everybody
It's
went to see
Cinecon.
that. Mm-hmm. Jack, you were going to say something.
Barbara Boyd, this is a good one. So, like you said, you work 6 days a week, and yet, did you go to the very famous little school that they had at MGM?
No.
No.
I was very fortunate in that I had private tutors, one-on-one instruction. which enabled me to graduate much earlier. Listen, if they took an absolute idiot and gave them one-on-one instruction, they're going to graduate faster because the class is held back to the slowest person in the class. So I was very lucky. I
You-
did go I went for 3 or 4 days to the school, but no more than that. A little school on the lot.
You have a great story about on Queen Christina with Lou Stone, working with Lou Stone.
Oh, Louis Stone. He was such a lovely man. That was when I had a plaque with a missing tooth as well. And when the camera was on Louis Stone and he was saying something very serious, and he was looking at me, I'd take my tongue and I'd take my plate and I'd move it back and up and forth and he'd break up. I never got to be naughty with my mother. Believe me, I never got to be naughty. I was naughty once. I got to play. I played a naughty child. I loved it. It was a picture with Minna Garbo, and she was my mother, and she was marrying this very peculiar, heavy-set man who wore a monocle, and he was in white tie and tails. And I was supposed to take, in those days, they didn't have bottled seltzer water. They had a big bottle, a squirt bottle, and you had to press a lever to spray to create seltzer water. And I got to spray him because I was a plate of brat. So first take, I sprayed him, just wet him, and then I flubbed my line. So the second take, I sprayed him, and then I flubbed my line. And then the director called me over and said, "Oh, Cora Sue, okay, he only has 3 clean outfits. This is the last one. This is a take." And I said, "Okay." I thought he didn't. I thought nobody knew I was doing it on purpose.
We've talked about so many wonderful, amazing stars. How about a few of the great directors that you were directed by and guided by? Are there any that stand out in particular?
Ruben Mamoulian
Hmm.
was one of the greatest directors I think of all times, and he was a stickler for authenticity. I loved that man, and he was wonderful. And those wonderful directors, each and every one I worked with, didn't talk down to me. They talked to me as though I was a person, not some idiot child. They were wonderful. I had marvelous experiences with them.
One thing in seeing your films, Cora Sue, that I think is so remarkable is how unaffected you are, because sometimes when you see certain child actors, they sort of have a bag of tricks and they kind of come across like almost trained monkeys. You never do that. You are so natural and you have such a comfortability that it's so charming to watch you work.
Thank you so much. But in retrospect, I enjoyed what I was doing because every time I got a part, I would literally be that character, and I loved it.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't working. How can I be impressed by doing something I enjoyed? Let's face it. I just had a good time.
I think a lot of times in life, things find us instead of us finding them. And I think Hollywood and acting certainly found you.
It's true. I mean, what a crazy story. Third day I was in Hollywood. It only happened in Hollywood. Truth is stranger than fiction.
I agree.
Love that. Christine Lutke is asking about Frances Marion.
About who?
Frances Marion?
She was a screenwriter at MGM, and she was the only woman, correct me if I'm wrong, to win 2 Academy Awards for screenwriting.
Frances Marion, the writer.
No, I didn't know her. No, I knew of her, but I didn't know her. I don't ever remember meeting her, but she was very respected and she was a wonderful writer.
Benjamin Maybner is asking about Marlene Dietrich.
Ooh.
Oh, Marlene Dietrich.
Got some great stories about her.
She was the most beautiful woman and the sweetest woman. And a girlfriend of mine took me to an astrologist in Hollywood. Oh, I tell you, this allergy season is just awful here in California. Excuse me. And I'm an Aries. I'm fact, I have a birthday coming up April 19th.
I-
I'll be 94.
Yes.
Anyway, I went to the April birthday party with this girlfriend of mine and met this astrologer who called himself astrologian. Excuse me, he was an astrologian, but it was Aries. And he said, remember this, you are an Aries. Don't ever tell anyone you are an Aries. Don't embarrass them. If they're an Aries, they'll tell you they are. He was so sweet. And that I met him because of Marlene Dietrich. And he called Marlene one morning. She was a devout devotee of his. He called her 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and said, don't go to work today. And she said, I have to. She went and broke her leg.
Wow.
Wow.
And he knew what he was doing. Listen, I'm a fallen away Roman Catholic. I really don't believe in all that. But he had some sort of intuition.
Great story. A couple of people are asking about your bit in the film Tom Sawyer and how you were originally cast in another part and then it switched.
That's the first film I saw. That was Tom Sawyer at the Egyptian Theater. I was cast to play the lead, Becky, and a year ahead of time. And it took them a year to find Tommy Kelly, who played Tom Sawyer. In the meantime, Tommy was normal height, and I had sprouted up. So I was 4 or 5 inches taller than he, but they'd already paid me. So I played, oh God, what was her name? Becky Lawrence was the lead. Anyway, I played the second lead, and I loved it. We had a lot of fun on that show. Ann Gillis played the lead. She was lovely.
Cora Sue, everyone is shocked that you are 94. Nobody can believe it. You don't look it at all. You look fabulous.
What are some of your secrets, Cora Sue, to
Do
longevity?
you have any advice for staying as young and amazing looking as you do?
Work. Don't stop. You become a vegetable. And another thing, keep your skin clean. I have scrubbed my skin with an exfoliant all my life until a dear friend of mine, Erin Paul, who is a very famous makeup artist, gave me a cleansing product. I don't know the name of it, unfortunately, but it's a jar of, it feels like Vaseline, and you put it on, you pat it on dry skin, then you take warm water and moisten it, and then take a face cloth with warm water, more than warm, and remove it, and you never put anything on your skin when you reach a certain age, such as I am, that lathers, because it's drying. So I'm using that now. So it's just keep your skin clean, get a lot of sleep, don't be bored. If you don't have anything to do, go take a course, learn something.
I think you are very inspiring, Cora Sue.
I have to go. My daughter's here to pick me up. She's taking me to the Easter brunch. So I'm going to say, God bless you.
We love you.
We love you. Talk to you
Happy
for
Easter.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Love you all.
Happy Easter, happy birthday. We love you.
Yes. And by the way, okay, by the way, Cora Sue has just been so delightful, and she has definitely agreed to do a sequel. So we will be doing more.
Absolutely, but I'm going to run.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jack. Thank you, Cora Sue, and happy Easter.
Thank you, Carrie.
Okay.